In this video, I'm going to show you 11 synth layering tactics that are going to make your synths pop and sound way more interesting and way more full than just a bog standard preset. So let me give you an example of some synths before the layering techniques. And now let's listen to them when we've got them layered up with other sounds. Hear the difference? Just sounds way more professional, and it doesn't matter whether you produce house, techno, pop, drum and bass, layering is an absolutely integral part, and that's what I'm going to help you with today. I want to give a massive shout out to our Accelerator student Zoya, who played at Luminosity Beach Festival in the Netherlands recently. She had a great time, and if that's the kind of thing you want to achieve with your music, click the link below to find out more about the Accelerator program. So without further ado, let's hop into the door and get it done. First, let's address the elephant in the room, the fact I'm in a different location from where I was in the intro. That just shows you the power of synth layering. It can literally transport you from one physical location in the world to another. If that's not a power production move, I don't know what is. First, I'd like to talk about the underlying tenets of how you decide what you're going to layer your synths with, because if you just throw on multiple layers for the sake of it, the chances are you're going to end up with a washed out, muddy sound. That means you can't get your mix as clear or as loud as you would like it to be. So there are 4 things you really want to be considering when choosing layers. Now, the first is probably the most obvious. It's going to be frequencies. For example, if you've got a saw synth, maybe you want to layer that with a piano because it's got different frequencies, a different timbre, and there's no point just layering multiple saw waves together to make some super saw synth, because you're just going to be increasing the volume if nothing else. The second characteristic to consider is the voicing of your sounds. So you could split your synth layers over a couple of octaves, once again breaking apart those frequencies, just giving each layer a bit more space to breathe. The third thing to consider is the ADSR shape of the sound, or the transient energy. For example, if you've got a really short sharp pluck sound, you probably don't need to layer that up with another short sharp pluck sound. Maybe you want to layer it up with a slightly smoother synth sound that's got a longer sustain or a longer release. And the fourth thing to consider is this stereo field. You have one layered synth out to the left, maybe you can layer the other one out to the right, and this just allows, once again, more space for each layer to breathe on its own, which means the cohesive whole will just sound better. So without further ado, let's get into these 11 synth layering techniques. Okay, so for the first technique, this is the call and response. You can either do this with the synth you're working with or with a secondary synth. So I'm going to show you both ways so you can hear the difference. So this is our standard chord progression at the moment, just with one synth layer. So it's nice, but a bit boring. So let's create this call and response. First, I'm going to create a new audio channel. Then I'm going to take the input from the serum or from our chord channel, arm the track, and then record the synth. Next thing we're going to do is cut this into our separate chords, like so. Our last one. And then I'm going to reverse each one by pressing R and just making sure on this last one I finish recording slightly early, so I'm going to drag it over and make sure it lines up with the end of that chord. And now this is the effect that we get. Kind of call and response. Much more interesting. And now let's try that with a secondary synth. And the way that we do that is duplicate our original synth, like so. Let's choose a different sample for it, or a different preset. Let's just choose this one. Let's have a listen to it. A bit more delicate. So let's record that. Same technique, new audio channel, select that new synth as the input, arm that track, and record. Okay, now let's split it into the separate chords. Reverse each one, so it leads smoothly into the next. Delete that secondary synth, so we're just left with the response section. And now let's have a listen. Way more interesting. Okay, on to synth layering technique number 2. Okay, so the next synth layering technique is actually layering in a sample. I find that it can just add a bit more grit, a bit more character to a sound. So if we've got our first synth layer sounding like this, let's load in a simpler in a new channel. And we don't need to use all of the notes, but let's just copy the whole progression. And then let's find a sample that works well with it. Now for this synth, we need something that's going to contrast that. So I'm going to actually add some kind of plucky sound. One of these sounds quite cool. But it's sampled on a different note. So we have to make sure that we have tuned our sample to the correct key. So if we go into our initial synth or our initial synth layer, hit a middle C. We want to make sure that our sample hits the same note when we hit that middle C as well. And it doesn't. So it needs to be transposed. That sounds about right. So now they should work perfectly together. And let's just fade in that sample layer. And then you can treat those two layers differently, of course. So let's put a little bit of echo on our sample layer. Way more character, way more interesting. Okay, on to synth layering technique number 3. Okay, number 3, and this has got to do with samples again, but it's sampling your original synth. So if we listen to our chord progression here with this synth, our standard layer, that's lovely. Here's how we can sample it to make another layer and make this just a way more interesting synth. So we're going to create another track. I'm also going to create another MIDI clip here in the original synth. I'm just going to sample one note. Let's sustain it. Okay, so we just want to sample that one middle C. So again, as we did a couple of points ago, we are just going to choose the input from that serum, arm the track, and then record that bad boy. Lovely. So we'll delete that new MIDI clip and we need to create a sampler to use this in. So I'm going to actually use the sampler rather than the simpler, but it doesn't matter which sampler you'll use. Could be your stock sampler, could be third party. But the important thing is that we're able to loop within that sampler. So now in Ableton, it's really easy. I can just drag that in. We can now delete that track. And now we can play those chords with this same sample. It's really important to sample that one note at middle C. And now have a listen to what's going on. And because each of these notes are obviously a different pitch, this sample is actually playing faster for the higher pitches and slower for the lower pitches. So it just adds another element of interest to it. But let's see what happens if we make this legato. So they all are longer. And now let's try some of that looping I was talking about. So I'm going to just do a ping pong loop, which means that it loops forwards and then backwards and forwards again. And you can change the loop and where it happens. And we'll crossfade it. And we could actually put that up an octave as well. Let's have a listen to it layered in with the original. Just some ear candy up there, tickling your ears. Cool, okay, on to synth layering technique number 4. Right, so for this technique, I'm going to use a Formant Shifter to create more richness and more harmonic variation within the sound. So we've got our original sound here, just the same that we used for the last example. Lovely. So what I'm going to do now is, I could actually not duplicate that track. What I'm going to do is sample that, so you don't have to have a plugin to do this. I'm just going to resample that sound again. Let's go there, arm it, record it. What's not happening there? Okay, chose the wrong track. Let's try again. Okay, now we are going to Formant Shift this to create a lower down layer. This works really well with vocals as well, and if you want my perfect vocal processing chain, you can check on the video that's coming up there or there as well. Anyway, so now we've got this sampled, sounds just the same as the original. We're going to go into it, we're going to choose Complex Pro as the warp mode, and now we are going to drop the pitch by 12. And now we just tweak the formants to wherever you want. So whatever sounds good to you, and then we can just bring that slowly in underneath our original synth. That's where it was, and now we've got this. Just thicker, deeper, fantastic, love that. You could even do it up an octave too. So let's put this up 12. It's going to be obviously much higher then. Let's take out the low end, make sure we're not going to... There you go. Okay, on to synth layering technique number 5. If you're enjoying this, by the way, let me know in the comments. Let me know which of these you're going to use and which one you've been enjoying. Give me a hell yeah or an amen, brother. And don't forget to subscribe if you are enjoying this. Okay, let's do it. Okay, so you remember at the beginning of this video, I talked about the different characteristics that you want to be complementing each other rather than just duplicating. Well, one of them was pitch and frequency. So what we're going to do is split these chords over a couple of octaves using different sounds. So this is my super high pitch technique. So this is the starting synth riff. So they're quite soft chords, you know, there's a bit of attack and they're around the mid-range. Yeah, it's high mids, but we're going to add some really kind of glassy, really nice transient effect by duplicating this. And we're going to choose a different synth. And you can check out my sound design video that's popping up as well, but let's find some kind of pluck. And let's see what we've got. Okay, that's quite glassy, so let's turn off the reverb. Perfect. But now what we need to do is push this up really high in terms of octaves. Let's turn it down a bit and just have a listen to what's going on. Let's take the feedback down on the delay. Okay, now let's bring that quietly in underneath our existing synth. Just adding that little extra bit of high-end energy, transient energy to make it pop and shine in the mix. Okay, for this synth layering technique, we are going to look at polyphonic splitting. Now what that means is that some of the notes on the keyboard will be played by one instrument and the other notes will be played by another instrument. Yes, of course you could just duplicate your synth like this, choose one sound on one track, one sound on another, delete half the instruments like that from one of the channels and then the other half from the other. Boom. Did I do the right ones then? Anyway, you do one on one channel, the opposite ones on the other. Yes, that is one way of doing it, but this is another way that you can do it too. If you go and create a group like this and create another instrument, let's choose another let's choose a completely different synth. Let's use Spire, and I don't know what this sound is going to be like because I haven't played it yet, but let's just choose Let's choose a different pad. And at the moment, they are both playing all of the notes. So let's have a listen to that. Sounds dope. Love it. But we might just want some of those notes to be played by one of these synths and the others to be played by the other. So what we can do is we can, how do I do this? Let me see if I can remember. Open up the key map. That's it. There you go. So you select the macro button here. If you're using Ableton, of course, then you hit this key map button here. And then you can just choose the brackets for where each synth will respond. So this top layer is the first synth, this bottom layer is the second. And let's just have a look and see roughly where those things are hitting. Around there, okay. So we can make this one just play the lower notes, like so. So we'll just take the bracket down. So at the moment, we've now got this one ending at the same place that this second layer starts. So now our first serum is going to play the lower notes, and our second, our spire, is going to play the upper notes. Which again can clear the space in your mix, because not both layers are playing all of the notes, which can sometimes get a bit clogged up. It can really block up your frequencies. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that one. On to the next tip. So for this next technique, it's trying to add a little bit of authentic organicness to the synth, if you will, and try and make it sound like it's a real instrument being played. Now, the way we're going to do that is duplicate our chord progression, which at the moment with one synth layer sounds like this. Yes. Like proper lush, but a bit vanilla. So I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to load in a contact. Now you'll need a sampler for this, and you can either create a noise patch on your own with lots of different noise samples, but it's far easier to find, say, an instrument where you can just have the mechanical noises is the best thing to do. But what I'm going to do is load in this giant, a piano patch, and let's just have a listen to it on its own. So they're just weird sounds, but they're going to give more impact and transient energy to our synth layer. So let's have a listen now. And you can usually choose or listen to the different notes of the noise patch as well. So if you don't like this really loud one, choose a different one. There we go. Perhaps take out the low end. Listen to the extra texture that adds to our synth. Amazing. Okay, on to the next technique, which is number. I don't know which number it is. There's probably a number that popped up on the screen. Next is pitch envelope. So I'm going to keep this same chord progression because it's freaking lush. I'm going to duplicate this synth like so. So it's exactly the same. And I'm going to create a really short, sharp pitch envelope with a secondary layer, which is again going to add more transient energy, and it's going to sound a bit like almost a laser. So I'm going to load in Serum for this because it's a really nice, easy synth to show you the routing on. This is what we use in my Accelerator program every single week. It's just the best way to teach sound design. So let's have a listen at the moment to our standard patch. So that sounds nice, but we've already got a chord playing those kind of mid frequencies. So let's do this pitch envelope idea. So what we need to do is create a really short, sharp amp envelope first. And now we need to use that envelope assigned to our pitch. So let's drag that over to the pitch envelope. And it's really quickly reducing in going down in pitch. So if we make this decay longer, you'll actually hear it going pew. Whoops. It's going to be easier if we just play one long note. that? Okay. I actually really like that. Let's take out some of that low end though. So we've just got that lovely high bit. And now lay it up with our other synth. That's off. Really soft, which you might want. Or you might want a little bit more character. Lovely. Okay, on to our next tip. We're getting close to the end yet, but don't go because these last three are really, really powerful. Okay, I call this synth layering technique the Jiffy Bag, aka the double envelope. So at the moment, we have got our standard synth layer that sounds like this. Really nice, but again, we want to just add a little bit more interest to that. So let's open it up. And we can hear the main envelope for this is just a normal kind of short, sharp stab. There's an initial transient and it fades out and then it's sustained, which is very nice. But that's the main envelope. We want a double envelope that's much slower. So I'm going to duplicate that and I'll just load in a serum. I'm actually going to program this from scratch. So at the moment, let's get our envelope the same shape, or roughly the same shape. So a bit of a decay, and then a sustain. So that's roughly it. But now we want to create a longer envelope on this second layer, and I'm going to apply a filter to this. So let's go into our normal filters and choose a bandpass filter. So it sounds like this on its own. But when we apply this second envelope to it and tweak that to be much slower, we get the double envelope, aka the Jiffy Bag. So let's have a listen. Assign that. And we need that to... We can even add some attack. Lovely. So let's add some unison to that to make it wider and richer. Give it some stereo width. And now let's listen to it with our original. You've got the first envelope and then the second one opens up just after it. So that's a nice way to add a little bit of extra interest to your synth layers. Okay, we've got two more, but these two more are arguably the most powerful. So we have got grouping and bussing and then auxiliary effects. So for grouping and bussing, this is where you can combine your synth layers into a group, or you can send them to an audio bus, and then you can process them as one signal. Now this is great for automations. So for example, we could put a filter on there. Let's just go EQ filter. And we could fade that out over time or open it up over time. And let's just add another layer in there as well, using one of the techniques we used earlier. So we're going to find another sound for the middle layer, a pluck, because again, we don't want to have too many of the same shaped sounds there. So I'm going to go into plucks. It's just... Yep, that's fine. And we're going to spread this up, make it really high in pitch. And now what I'm going to do is add some delay just to that channel. like so, ping pong. And now all together with our filter. So yeah, buses, super powerful. And not only that, we move on to our last, number 11 for my synth layering techniques, and that is using auxiliary channels. There is so much you can do here. So what I'm going to do is give you a couple of examples of my most powerful techniques. Again, let's just stick to what we've got. The standard thing you can do is add some reverb to an auxiliary channel. That's a starter. But let's add what I call the auxiliary suck back. Implemented by few, enjoyed by many. What I'm going to do is add a compressor on the auxiliary channel after the reverb. Take the input. Now this is a bit advanced, and again, if you want more advanced training, do check out my Accelerator program. I'm going to take the audio input from our group of synths. You remember we grouped them all into one bus. And now let's duck the reverb when that synth plays, and then as the synth dies down in volume, it's going to allow that reverb to kind of suck back and give it a cool reverse effect. And in fact, I'll link to a video that does that just there. Now this doesn't work so well with long sustained sounds. It works better with stabbier sounds. So that's without it on, too washed out, and that's with it on. Okay, this last one that I'm going to show you is super cool. You kind of need a third-party plugin for this, but it's called the Crystallizer, and it is by Sound Toys. Again, you can get a 50% discount on all of Sound Toys stuff in my Accelerator program, as well as many other plugins as well. But now check this out. This can add just another layer, just all from the same synths, but you're adding something special to it. Listen to that. Oh, that is beautiful. Low end. Okay, without the aux channel. Oh, boring. Oh, my mind's just been blown. I apologise. As a producer, that's my responsibility. But it is what it is. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that. I very much hope you do. I kind of got into it, especially towards the end there. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. Really helps me out, and like the video, and thank you so much for watching. Until next time, cheers and happy producing.